welcome to the South Star Classroom. Happy New Year and happy all the other holidays that we celebrated. Thank you for tuning in. I am Jubilee. We got Omar Yanar. We got the Dr. Charles Cole the third. Don't forget the third. And we have got the Beard of Knowledge, Wisdom, Expertise. We're just going to keep adding to his name, David Castillo. How are y'all doing today?
I said so beautifully, man.
Let's do.
She pronounced your name, Castillo. She pronounced it perfectly, with like perfection, man. You got that double L. She got that EO real well.
You sound like I call him like Castilla, I call him Castillo.
and she it ain't gonna be all about you, Doc. You're complimenting the
give me that
lovely
quesadilla
lady and her ability. Give me that dang quesadilla, Napoleon.
Well, I want to do Charles's favorite part.
Oh my God.
Checking in. All right. So how are we doing today? How was your break? If you had one, any travels, your holidays, what's going on in your world? Let's start with Omar Yanar.
Oh, damn. All right. Doc doesn't like disclosing where he's been at, but I will disclose this one. I was actually in Scotland for New Year's. And it was supposed to be this like phenomenal wild affair because the Scots on the 29th of December, which I was there, have this 20,000 person torchlight parade through the streets of Edinburgh. And like Edinburgh is not like a huge town. So like imagine a bunch of, yes, dude, exactly as David's thinking, dude. Like
No. We're talking about the dog. His dog on cue every time we start the show goes and stands perfectly and stares out the window. Every time we start
that dog's so handsome, man.
And it doesn't move. It's just it's usually just a statue, but we just sorry, Omar.
I love that dog. No dogs in the firelight procession in Scotland, but there are 20,000 probably highly inebriated Scots running through the streets with torches, literal people dressed up as Vikings. And the weather was so terrible. It was so windy. It was so apparently Scottish that they canceled the entirety of all the New Year celebrations. I mean, like all of it, like the 29th, the 30th, the 31st. I was super excited to like attend all these. Nothing. So I went to the Christmas markets and got kablamoed on mulled wine. Happy New Year, everybody. It was awesome.
I absolutely love it. Thank you. Scotland is one of my favorite places. I have my auntie Lucky. My auntie Lucky is my grand aunt. Married a Scotsman.
Ooh.
Uncle Tom. They've been there for, I don't know, 30, 40 years.
Okay.
And so I visited a long time ago, a couple of times for the Fringe Festival. So if you haven't been to the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, you would love it. It's arts, meets music, meets drinking, meets all the things that you love together. Yes.
All the things that I love.
Yes.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the Scots are a phenomenal people, though. I got invited to like 87,000 different parties, bars, celebrations. I went to a few. They were fun. Let's just leave it at that.
Glad you enjoyed. I'm going to throw the ball to David Castillo. Don't worry, I ignored all their comments about saying Castillo.
There you go. Checking in. It's been a while. I think we were off for 2 weeks, and I know that both of you and Charles helped to kind of keep things going over the break. But yeah, it was a good break. Feels like a lot has changed since then. We've had some things happen in the world and in our country, as we always do.
My country, go.
Exactly, but it's good to be back, and we didn't do much over the break. We were here. We had a bunch of family come in. It was like family kind of ambush, and then we spent a week up in our local mountains here. Rented a cabin, and just did a bunch of hiking and all those things. So it was very, very relaxing, and have come back to a crazy amount of work. So yeah,
boy,
which I'm grateful for.
Yeah, I was about to say, man, that's not a bad thing.
Right, a good problem to have. Awesome. Mm-hmm. All right, Charles, how are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm good. One thing to clear up, Omar, is I don't have a problem saying where I've been. I don't like.
You have a problem saying where you at.
Yes, and there are reasons why. I've had people show up on me. I've had people figure out what hotel I was at. It's a thing.
Hotel.
That's what
people
happens when you're a celebrity.
shit.
I'm just telling you, man. People listen. I'm just telling you. I don't. Or I'm in a place where I can't see everybody, so I don't disclose it. And people will say,
that's always the problem.
You didn't come see us. So
yeah, I get all pissed off.
So when are you gonna own that you're a celebrity? I think
I'm not a celebrity at all. Just people just crazy. It has nothing to do with that. No. I promise you, I'm not. I'm so not a celebrity. But I'm good. I didn't really break per se. There's a lot to get done that all of it did not get done, but I did have fun with the South Star Classroom audience. We had a good time last week, and I think we got to get deep into some stuff and have some good conversation. And I am excited because the one and only Jew Ransom May, let's got to add that on there, is hosting us today. So how are you doing, and what are we talking about?
I am doing wonderfully. I don't know that I had a break because I was home with my beloved children. So I cooked and baked and went to the supermarket, cooked and baked, and went to the supermarket and went to the supermarket, cooked and baked, cleaned, and was like, hey, stop arguing over oxygen. Like, that was essentially my break. And then to boot, we are on tomorrow will be our third snow day. Unprecedented. I thought that they would call, do maybe a late arrival tomorrow, but school has been canceled Monday, Tuesday, and now tomorrow because we did get hit with some snow. Interestingly enough, though, being born and raised in New York, it's like no snow is ever challenging. It's just like, oh, we're closing school for this. But I will take it as it comes, and that is how I am doing. Today's topic is the literacy crisis. Who's really to blame? And not that we really want to blame anybody, but we got to point the finger somewhere. And that's basically what we're all going to be doing today, pointing the finger somewhere, right? For decades, programs like Fontes and Pinnell, if you're an educator, we call it the FMP, Lucy Calkins approaches, they dominated our schools. And this really started when the war on how to teach reading began back in the 90s, probably late 80s, 90s. So now Fontes and Pinnell and Lucy Calkins and Heinemann and all the different publishers that were pushing this teaching and these resources are in some hot water. Some lawsuits have have been filed, and they're being accused of leaving out some critical pieces, right? Namely a critical piece in reading instruction, and that's phonics. Hooked on Phonics worked for me. Like, what happened to the phonics? So they made millions and millions. I wish I knew how to say it like Trump. Millions. Him in any way, but they made millions and millions of dollars. And the babies still can't read. And we are in 2025, and the babies still cannot read. And so the questions are: were these methods flawed from the start? Right? Was it good intention, and was it research-based, right? Who's responsible for the fact that our nation still is struggling with reading? And I'll share some of the stats from the most recent NAEP. We had one a couple years ago. Another one will be released actually in February. And so who's responsible for that? And then how do we fix it? So before diving in, let's give you some stats. So according to NAEP, only about 18% of Black students and 23% of Hispanic students in fourth grade scored at or above proficiency in reading on the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. This is a national assessment, so it's even ranked higher than the state assessments that schools give. And then, so this was the 2023-2024 reports. By eighth grade, the gaps persist. And 54% of Black students and 45% of Hispanic students are scoring below the basic level in reading, compared to 22% of white students. Right? And so I want to just walk you through a little bit of reading history in America. Okay, reading rainbow. All right. So in the 1980s, it was all about whole language. Any 80s babies out there? I do not even remember learning to read. And I don't know if that's a good thing, right? But it was all about whole language. And it was very—
What is that?
And it's all about just learning to read naturally, focus on context, meaning. Basically, if you read more, you'll learn to read, and essentially, you'll probably learn to read just as easily as you learn to speak. And we have since learned that that is faulty, but that is what existed in the 1980s. All right, and it was like a constructivist principle, like you'll be able to just put it together eventually, which again we've learned is not true. And then in 1990, the reading wars began. And so the whole debate between whole language versus phonics intensified. And so then there were some key events that happened. So in 1997, there was a national reading panel that was assembled. Balanced literacy. Y'all remember the term balanced literacy? That's when that emerged, right? Back in the late 90s. And it was supposed to be a compromise between whole languages, emphasis on meaning, along with phonics instructions. And we've always known that we needed both. And so I don't know where we got to this place of kind of pitting both against each other when we needed both. We needed the meaning, we needed the phonics in order to make sense of the words so that we can make meaning. And so programs that became kind of hot during that time was Lucy Calkins had a units of studies like that started gaining popularity. She was one of the people that was emphasizing writing workshops and reader response over like explicitly teaching phonics. Right, so this is the dangling thing that we've kind of skirted around, and we're kind of paying the price for it as a nation now. Then 2000s came. We had No Child Left Behind. I just feel like Johnny still got left behind. Right, but scientifically based reading, that's when the research kind of started to appear, but it doesn't seem like we adopted it as a nation, right? They were still kind of doing scientifically based research or research about reading as a science. And so then it became evidence-based literacy. Siri, I am not talking to you. Evidence-based literacy instruction became like a federal priority. So then they started tying funds to reading programs as incentives. And then we have what's called scientifically based reading research, SBRR, came out of No Child Left Behind in 2001. And so essentially, we get to the 2010s, the science of reading, it's getting stronger out there. It gains some traction. More people are looking at that and wondering, wait a minute, like, how do you really teach someone to read? Like all these years we've been saying it's constructivist, you can just put it together, but we're still struggling in reading as a nation. Like, let's kind of dig into this more. And so the science of reading became more to the forefront. And then there some states like Mississippi, they began to adopt evidence-based reading laws. Like, listen, we're not going to have programs in the school that are not scientific, that are not proven to be able to teach students like how to read. Right? We're not going with philosophy and all of that. Reading is a science, and we need to have curriculum that align with that belief. And then the 2020s, here we are. The people were like, well, shoot, my child still can't read. My child, 30 years old, is still skipping over words. They're still trying to use pictures to identify, and they're calling the wrong words. And so what's up with that? And so parents really just around 2020, when parents were home, listening to their students read while they were being taught on Zoom, right? Parents were more around, some parents were jobs or what have you, then they started to listen in on this reading instruction. And it started with a lot of concern, buzz, and parents started digging in. And here we are with a reckoning in literacy instruction in the 2020s. And so major curriculum providers like Lucy Calkins and Fontes and Pinnell are now in a major lawsuit that was filed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in December, less than a month ago, stating that you guys knew what you were doing. You knew that we needed phonics. We needed explicit phonics instruction. And it's not a constructivist thing. You don't just figure it out, even though some children have figured it out because some just are able to. That's just not the way that you teach reading. And for the past 30, 40 years, school districts across the country had adopted Lucy Calkins, had adopted Fontes and Pinnell, had adopted leveled reading, right? All of those leveled guided reading and libraries and all of that. That was like a nationwide thing. And so even if you were trying to pull your child out and put them somewhere else, most likely the district next door was providing reading instruction in the same faulty way. So how do you get it out? And so fast forward to now, some parents started to if they had the time, teach their children how to read themselves, get a tutor, and all the things, right? So the question is, who is to blame, right? Now, one piece, the lawsuit really is anchored in deception. That's the accusation. They're asking for damages, and they're stating that Lucy Calkins, Fontes Pinnell, the publishers, really operated under deception, knowing that they were missing the most critical component of reading. And not only were they missing the phonics piece, but this cueing system that they have where, oh, look, use the meaning or the syntax or the visual, right? Does it look right, sound right? That whole thing was just an inaccurate way of providing reading instruction. And they knew that, but continue to push their product and even engaged in anti-phonics writing. So they would put out articles that were against phonics. And so the parents that put the claim forward are saying, you got all this money from all these school districts on the backs of our children who still cannot read, knowing that this was faulty and not going to help our children be strong readers. And so those are the facts. Who's to blame?
Mm.
I blame the one-armed man. That's where I stand on that. I got all kinds of opinions, but David, I feel like you're brimming here with a comment. So I'm gonna.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm. This is a great topic. It's a big topic, and I appreciate you, Jubilee, for bringing it forward, because we have not yet talked about this yet, and it's still. I forget the name of the New York Times journalist, Emily something or other, put out, a long series that kind of exposed a lot of these issues, something about the science of reading or something about deception. I forget, but like, who's to blame? I think there's a couple of things. I think number one, it's interesting that with this new administration coming in, they're talking about the dismantling of the Federal Department of Education, right? Mm-hmm. I think ultimately, if we're talking about money that is being used to purchase curriculum, how do we know that this curriculum is tested, is effective, is rooted in some kind of science, right? And so I think there's that. I think there's an issue for the Federal Department of Education, state departments of education, right, that are just allowing taxpayer money to go to fund curriculum that we know now is like heavily flawed, right? Number two, I would say this is like one of those interesting where capitalism meets the public sphere, right? You have public school districts that are purchasing curriculum from, privately run, privately managed corporations, right? And their mission, they might say one thing on their mission statement is to educate all children, help children all develop healthy reading habits. But in reality, they're about making money, right? And so once you've identified that your product is flawed in some way, shape, or form, you have no incentive to acknowledge that your product is flawed. It's out there, right? And I will say, and then I'll hand it over before to someone else, and we can go around and around. My time, I've only spent I spent 3 years as a head of school at a public Montessori charter school in Oakland, California, which is being shut down as we speak for low outcomes. But while I was there in those 3 years, like, we were able to improve outcomes for young people across the board, close achievement gaps as early as kindergarten. And we also were, we adopted the Calkins, Fontes and Pinnell reading curriculum. But we also knew that in certain areas, it wasn't quite explicit enough, right? We needed to And so we had, it was a Montessori curriculum. We integrated some of what we felt we could apply with the Fontes and Pinnell curriculum. You're talking about the leveled readers, et cetera, et cetera. But the whole time, we also implemented a system of ongoing assessment. So regardless of the method, we knew when children were falling behind on a standardized measure. And then we would just get more explicit with them. Small reading groups, very targeted phonics instruction, right? We're not beholden to any one particular method. We're like, whatever, every child's going to need something different to help them learn to read. And so we did that, and got a lot of pushback from the Montessorians. They're like, "Oh, that's not Montessori." And I'm like, "The kids in 4th grade, they can't read." And the last thing I'll say is that I remember we identified the curriculum, we purchased the curriculum, and then the other part is getting your teachers into the institutes, right? That are held, I think, at Columbia or New York University. I think Columbia. And I will tell you this: it's a cult. The whole thing was like a cult. Like my teachers, like we got 2 seats at the Calkins summer, this and that. And it was like the whole thing had this weird feel to it. It was crazy. And so, I mean, people have described it as a cult, and I would say there are definitely cult-like aspects to it, which is crazy that we're having this conversation now when, this is happening 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think, this is a very inside baseball topic, like people that are teachers, and you're talking about curriculum and how I think, for somebody to be held accountable in that, sure, fine. I don't know that beef. I don't know that world in that way. I think as somebody who's not an educator, who's not going through that stuff, I think to lay the blame on this sole actor or their company, when people still had to purchase that stuff, and these are also supposed to be educators, right? It seems a little scapegoatish. It seems like this person made out like a bandit and might not have been great at what they did, but it's not. But singularly, it can't be one entity, right? Other entities have to okay that. Other entities have to continue to buy that. And to say, well, it ain't our fault, right? To me, that just feels like a very public education tactic and move, right? Like, well, it's not our fault the kids can't read after X amount of time. It's this. And, and I think when we think about this, I love Mama Toya's point, right? So she says she has a Black library at home, or she's going to learn herself the pedagogical things so she can teach these things on her own. I think that nobody's coming to save our communities. So it's like, if that many people can't read over that amount of time, at some point it's like, well, how often am I reading with my kids? How am I doing this? Am I making them? I remember my grandmother used to just make me read the newspaper and like tell me what it was. Like, she didn't have any, like, she's not an educator. You know what I'm saying? She was a nurse. She doesn't have the skill set that Jubilee has or Omar or David has, but it's like sitting with me and reading it. Hey, I want you to write down or circle every word you don't understand, and we're going to go look it up. Like, I think there is, as a community, I think we have to take a lot of that blame per se. We just got to be responsible for us. Like, now, systemically, those things are going to happen. And like I said, Kareem Weaver is like a good OG of mine. He is a big science of reading guy. He's been on this and beating the drum, so he might be doing a backflip that they on her head, right? I'm not mad at that. That's that business. I'm just saying, from a community standpoint of somebody who's not an educator, if your kid can't read, or your kid is stumbling through stuff that they shouldn't be stumbling on, or your kid is in the 6th grade and you give them a 3rd grade book and they struggling, you need to be stepping in. You got to put them into things, and you're the only person where it's written in your DNA code that has to care about those kids. And that's just my take on it when I read the article,
Oh man,
I think I'll just say it's a compounded issue.
Don't lose what you were gonna say, David, because David has emotion.
I'm hot right now. I'm hot.
No, when David has emotion, this never happens. So go ahead.
Let me say one thing, and then Omar can go, or Jubilee.
I'll go after.
I think responding to your comment, Charles, I agree with you. I think in a perfect world, students have those supports at home. They have a home library with, culturally relevant literature. But we have to assume when students come to school that they don't have those things, right?
Absolutely.
We cannot rely on those things at the school level if you're a public school. And what we're talking about here is essentially fraud, you know, in the amount of like hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more, to a publisher that was promoting, you know, flawed curriculum. And at the same time, I think it's interesting that now the state of Massachusetts, which is, you know, a state government, is suing this publisher, when in reality, they should have been able to examine and vet, you know, this curriculum for its ability to actually, you know, help children to read. So I think it's an interesting kind of dichotomy there. But I mean, I hear you saying like, you know, we are on our own, and we are on our own, right? But I'm unwilling to let this system, you know, just like walk away from it and wash their hands when they've been complicit. They've been complicit. The publisher was complicit, as well as school districts across the country, state departments of education, as well as the federal Department of Education.
Can I respond to him, y'all, and then okay?
Yes, Omar, and then I'll jump in. Sure.
Yes, thank you. And I want just to clarify, I 1000% agree with you. I think that as educators and people that run schools, I think y'all are looking at it from the lens that you should be, right? This is fraud, and there are multiple people culpable, which I agree with. What I'm saying is somebody who's not there is that if something is happening and something is off and something is wrong, one, you should know if something's off and something is wrong, and two, there are things that you need to be doing. And if parents and students are doing what they need to do on their end, and educators and school leaders like David and Jube and Omar are doing what they need to do, you are now having and creating a checks and balances system. So I don't disagree. And I think, like I said, Fryer, I don't have an issue with it. I don't think she should be the only person getting fried. I think that Massachusetts, I think that the people that bought this shit over and over and over again also are culpable. What I'm saying is, but because of this cluster F, because of what we're seeing, you should be even more motivated as a parent at the house, a grandmama at the house, a after school program that works with kids outside of schools. You have to be even more motivated to catch and correct and whistleblow on these things. If it lasted for how long did this person have power? How many books did they get to sell? That should tell you all you need to know. That I just wanted to clarify. Thank you for allowing me that, Jude.
Sure. Go ahead, Omar. What you got?
Yeah, I mean, a lot.
I know you do.
I'm going to come from a slightly different perspective and share, I think, an angle that may not be fully expressed. So again, it's not that I'm touting my position as superintendent. I'm just saying as superintendent, I have to be the one that starts like really circulating this curriculum and making decisions. And how does this start? And just for our audience's sake, like, how does this work? And I'm not going to lambast or place the entirety of blame on any entity. I'm going to spread that blame across the palette like a nice piece of butter over a piece of toast, because I think everybody in this situation has something to blame. So what happens ultimately is superintendents like myself and school districts are essentially lobbied by all of these curriculum distributors. And when I mean lobbied hard. What does that look like? It looks like sales reps from these curriculum companies coming in, stroking egos. They know how to do it really well. It's often good-looking women who come in and stroke the egos of these extraordinarily insecure superintendents who love to golf, love to flirt, think that because of their position, because they were a fucking nerd in high school, or they probably weren't even that nerdy. They're not that smart to begin with. Just weren't cool in high school. Let's put it that way. Like now's their time to come back and get these really beautiful women. And the only way that they're getting them is by being coaxed to buy these curriculum products. Now, if you think about just the sheer amount of money it takes, you think about someone like Greenpeace. How many lobbyists do you think Greenpeace has got compared to, I don't know, the tobacco industry or the NRA? Cats with money have more resources, more lobbyists, and therefore companies like this one probably have a massive sales force with all the bells and whistles to convince these superintendents and state departments of ed that they're doing exceptionally well. And I got to tell you, they are salespeople. Their job is to sell this product. being on the other end of this, where I'm buying a product, I've got to tell you that 10 for 10, every single time that someone has made a promise of a curricular product and how it's going to revolutionize everything wasn't worth a bag of flaming dog shit that they talked about. And I mean that seriously. It is so overhyped. And it's a lot of what Bill and Toya was saying and David was saying was that as teachers, as educators, we have had to consistently, deeply supplement these curriculums and absolutely kind of excavate them like some kind of, fucking archaeologist, like we're Indiana Jones and shit, and pick out what's good, use it, because they sell a bill of goods about how great it is, and it isn't. Because, dude, these curriculum people don't give a shit if it works or not. They give a shit of whether or not it's being sold. So you compound, these salespeople who are really persuasive, persuade these superintendents and these state governments and state entities to buy their curriculum because they're pals, they're chums, they went golfing, they flirted, they did all the things. And all of a sudden they're like, well, like, it's not working. So what happens is that they go back to these salespeople and be like, hey man, this isn't working that well. And the salespeople are like, oh, it's not being implemented with fidelity. It's the teacher's fault. It's the teachers who are not implementing the curriculum with fidelity. That is their constant statement. And for us, it's very easy for me to be like, absolutely not. I'm in those classrooms. I see how it's being implemented. I see the extraordinary gaps, but when you're in a massive state like Texas or Massachusetts or in a massive school district, to have that kind of on the ground knowledge that I have the fortune of having because my school system is quite small isn't a luxury that a lot of folks have. But then what happens is that those teachers are ultimately like, hey man, this isn't working. And then the superintendents and the higher ups are just like, oh, these teachers are incompetent because the salespeople are telling me that it's the way that they're implementing the curriculum that doesn't work. Next thing you know, it's 5 years later. We're barely getting the data. We're barely understanding if kids are reading. And I got to tell you, even if parents are aware of this and start seeing marginal gains in reading, they're going to think it is working because at least they're seeing improvements versus what should be an improvement. Because I got to tell you, most parents, when I sit down and have that conversation with them, and often now it's not even me anymore, it's our school principals and our assistant principals sitting down and being like, hey man, your kid reads at the 4th grade level and they're in the 9th grade. They're like, what? I thought my kid could read. They read these things. And I'm like, they can read those things. But they're not reading at grade level because oftentimes our parents actually don't even know what constitutes the 10th grade reading level, the 9th grade reading level. Like, I mean, can you guys just flat off the top of your head, other than maybe remembering a novel you read in 10th grade, ascertain what the 10th grade reading level is? Like, if I don't have a diagnostic, I have no idea. So where I'm coming at is that
that's why I read Lord of the Flies, though. Still one of my favorite books.
Yeah. Good ass book, man.
Lord of the Flies is a bomb. But yes,
it's a phenomenal book. But like, this is where I just come in from the perspective of this is a lot of people to blame. But I want to go back to the fact that I really have seen this and really just want to put a highlight on the fact that our teachers know their shit. And they oftentimes will speak up and say something and are often ignored by principals and especially by superintendents because the overriding consensus is you don't know what you're doing. We do. So implement the curriculum with more fidelity. So this is an awesome opportunity to finally be like, you know what, dude, these companies are full of shit. These state institutions and superintendents do not have their hand on their pulse of what is going on curricularly in their schools. And they are not listening to the teachers and the parents at the level that they should be to understand how to make very quick changes instead of just acquiescing to a bunch of, like, I don't know, fraternizing salespeople who use the male ego in order to boost their sales. It's a hell of a situation, man. But I got to tell you, I don't think it's exclusive only to education. I think we're just prey to it as other institutions are.
I think you're muted.
Sorry. You would think that after like 9 years of doing this, I remember. Okay. But I agree with what you have all said. And of course, I wrote down a couple of things because some words just popped out to me, right? Trust is one of them, right? You send your children to school thinking, hey, these people are the experts, they know, right? And not saying that you're just going to give all the power away, but to David's earlier point, like, you guys went to school to become teachers, right? You went through teacher preparation programs or some kind of training, so then you should know, right? But the truth of the matter is, if you are in a teacher preparation program and it's not necessarily focused on early literacy or early language acquisition, you don't know. I didn't get that really. I might have had one course, right? So it makes me question, this trust thing, or think about this trust thing. It makes me have questions around teacher preparation and like, your teachers are the bomb, Omar, right? But that's a lot of teachers are not the bomb.
Yeah, I mean, you've been to our schools. It's because we are
Reasons.
constantly coaching and training teachers, which ain't
I've seen it with
happening
my
in a
own
lot of
eyes.
school districts.
I've seen
Exactly.
it in my own eyes, right? Looking at data, all these pieces, right? That some of it gets taught in teacher preparation, but some of it gets taught because you got a strong principal who understands the importance of pedagogical knowledge, looking at data. But what happens when you don't have that? Right. So now you come in, right? And I came into teaching through the back door, right? I didn't complete my undergrad there. I came in through a program called New York City Teaching Fellow. So that 4 years, I didn't get that. So I had to learn how to teach on the go. And I know that there are many other teachers that are like that. So then you come in, and they're like, here's the curriculum, right? Teach kids how to read. And then the curriculum that I'm telling you to implement is faulty, but this is all you know, all you have. And even if you were to call your sister girl or your brother or whoever from another district somewhere down the way, they're going to be doing the same thing. Right. So it's just like, what questions did we ask in terms of the effectiveness of this stuff? And like, why is it that as an industry, for lack of a better term, that we're not as curious as other industries in terms of what we allow into our system? Like when I think about, and I was talking to my friend Sunshine about this earlier, like in other fields, if you're an expert, if you're called an expert on something, and if we're using your stuff, you got receipts. If you're like, I was like, hey, maybe I don't love Ben Carson's political views, but I know that man separated a bunch of Siamese twins. So if he comes into a space and they're like, hey, listen to brother man over here. He's an expert neurologist. He's an expert brain surgeon. He has separated Siamese twins. I'm like, oh, I'll sit down and listen. I'm not going to be separating twins, but he has had enough experience in the field, right? Applying the skill set and having success. So he deserves to be listened to. But in education, somebody comes with bright, what do you call it? What I'm thinking, diagrams and pie charts and colorful presentations, and they don't have any success. They don't have any receipts, and we still go, okay, yeah, we'll let you in so that you can experiment for decades on our children, but you have no receipts. Like, that's shameful, right?
Yeah. So can I jump in there? I thought it was interesting. I think it's a very interesting conversation, and just a few things like, when Omar was talking and he was explaining how, these sales reps come in and kind of wine and dine and swoon superintendents. I thought you was talking about the Sackler family in Purdue, but here's,
yeah, man, dude, I was thinking the exact same metaphor, man. I was like, it's real similar.
And here's the thing, right? It's not just the Sackler family who should be culpable for the opioid crisis. You get what I'm saying? Like, there were people, professionals, people that knew better, people that started to see things, right? There was a gestalt of these things happening, and at some point, it's almost similar to one of these other things, man, where there's a textbook. If you're a history teacher and you're teaching something about happy slaves for 20 years, if you're worth your weight in salt as an educator, something in you,
yes,
right, is like would kind of say, oh, I don't think I agree with this. So at some point, you have to have some type of courage, some type of, like, as if you are, what this tells me, and this just makes more of my point, right, is that it makes you feel even less confident about education systems, right? Because if you're not entrenched or good enough or professional enough at what you do, or have a mastery, if you are a literacy teacher, if that is what you do, to feel that something is off or wrong, then everything that I'm telling Toya and these parents and everybody across the country to do just has more credence, right? Like, you cannot just drop your kids off to a system that has shown you decade over decade over decade over decade that they get it wrong a lot. You have to have checks and balances. And that's not disrespecting good educators and teachers, but it's saying that my child is more precious to me than you and your career. So I got questions. Like, there are things that if David saw, because of his professionalism, because of his experience, because he's a master at what his craft is, he's going to be like, I don't know if that's, he's going to ask some questions. And I don't think any black parent, any brown parent, any parent at all should just blindly trust any system that is giving you numbers that Jubilee started with less than 20% of black kids reading on grade level. I just think if that's the case, you're asking and welcoming for your kid to continue to get education malpractice on them continuously over the years. That was my larger point.
Gotcha.
I think before, when Jubilee, when you opened this up, you kind of gave us a rundown of kind of you gave us a little history lesson, right? And I think thinking about, at some point, governments didn't even like measure outcomes in public education. It just, you went to school, you didn't, right? And then 1980s, right? What's the book that came out? Nation at Risk or something like that?
I don't remember the title.
Yeah, Nation at Risk came out. It was a book that came out and kind of criticized our education systems, and kind of put it in the context of like a economic and national security issue, right? Started a conversation. But the biggest policy shift, essentially, that actually had demonstrable shifts, not just in literacy and in reading, which we're talking about today, but also in math and other subjects, was No Child Left Behind. Was No Child Left Behind, because it applied to all schools, and it like required schools to collect data. It mandated, testing in every grade level, and it set targets for all school. Like, you had to show improvement, not just as a school or a system, but for specific subgroups as well.
I was gonna say, what other term did they birth, David? I was gonna throw you that alley. What was the term that we love and it came from No Child Left Behind?
I don't know. What?
Disaggregation. It was the first time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you had to disaggregate data.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
Exactly. Yeah, yep. That's right. And so it was a big shift in the mindset. And this is like before the science of reading debate even started. But what it did do is it made people pay attention to outcomes. It made them pay attention to subgroups, and it kind of infused money and funding in the form of like early elementary education reading initiatives that were kind of more closely aligned with the science of reading. So, I mean, these things all happened, right? And we saw outcomes improve for children. But, when No Child Left Behind went away and ESSA came in, the accountability just wasn't there. And if there's no accountability, it's going to be very hard to change behaviors. And that means like behaviors from the individual classroom to the principal, to the executive director, to the superintendents, for the decisions they make around the types of curriculum that they're purchasing, right? Not just going to purchase something that looks fluffy, and you got courted, by a salesperson. But like, I want to know if this is actually going to work. Is it effective? Show me data, show me literature. I don't need to see a whole scientific study, but in terms of its methodology, I want to see something. And that's where we dropped the ball.
I think you bring up a good point. I would say it goes further into, we found that we had to call people to decipher whether or not what we were being told was truthful or not. So this goes even a step further, David, just to be like, dude, they show us all this data and they'll I hate to use the word cherry picking, right? Because it's such a
Yes.
constantly used term,
Yeah.
but they will basically demonstrate to us, here are the schools that it's like, quote, working really well. And look, for any person who doesn't understand like econometrics and regression analysis and all that fancy stuff,
Yeah.
you see this proof that it works. And they're like, oh, that's cool. Until I start asking like really interesting questions, like what's the socioeconomic demographic of that school? So like, show me reading growth as opposed to just reading scores. And then I'll make phone calls. And that's where I think the rubber hits the road. That's really different for us. Like we'll actually start calling references and start hearing like, yeah, man, we were sold a bill of goods. And 3 years later, this is where we're at right now. And no one does that. And it's oftentimes, sadly, such a good old boy system in terms of, well, I know this person at this company and they're my friends and they're doing this, that, and the other in terms of like benefits to me and benefits to the school system, that it becomes like a crony system, right? It's like the fucking Gilded Age and shit, dude. It's like, like President Garfield trying to get rid of the crony system in the like early 1900s, where people are just doing things for each other because they're friends as opposed to what's best for kids. And I got to tell you, like, I have a lot of beef to pick with a lot of these superintendents who I don't think are curricular experts at all. I think that they're simply just D-rate politicians who know how to navigate a very interesting hierarchy, know how to navigate and kiss ass in the system in order to get to the places that they're at. And they don't know shit from Shinola when it comes to actually disciplined curricular practices, or at least, in my opinion, the kind of rigorous work you need to do, like you were saying, David, to not just vet a curriculum, not just find out whether it works or not, but to actually start asking some very difficult questions to see through all the bullshit and to call people that have actually used it to see if it's actually worthwhile or not. Because they don't. And they don't because I don't think they have any clue what actually works or not, because they were probably never in the classroom doing high level work to begin with. And therein lies the issue. And this is kind of what Bill talks about, is that like from top to bottom, you have like a huge conundrum of an issue. And I'll keep going back to this statement because as a teacher, we have got to give significantly greater credence to the people in the classrooms actually doing this work, and listen to them when they say, hey, man, this is not effective. But I feel as if school districts oftentimes ignore their teachers unless they're on some massive strike and, undergoing some massive pressure to bring about change, often through duress, right? Meaning like, hey man, we ain't gonna have school because we're all striking. So unless you listen to us, no one's learning. And it's like, oh, finally, we're gonna listen to our teachers. It's a weird system. And I think there's so much ego at the top and at the central office level that they're just not listening and they're kind of blind to it. And I don't want to say that's every school district, because there are school districts across the country that are extraordinarily intelligent and sharp and receptive, but that often is a reflection of like a really good person at the leadership helm who understands that, hey man, this is where the rubber hits the road and we should be listening. It's disgusting because we want to do what's best for kids, and at all these differing levels, it's just like the tragedy of the commons. Everyone expects someone else to do something, and because they do, no one does anything, and we still have the reading scores that we have. And that's why, Doc always says, damn dude, sometimes we're just out here on our own. Out here on our own and shit, man.
So
Kills me.
sigh.
I know. Such a beautifully optimistic show that we have today.
I mean, because
kids can't read. The system
whole
corrupt.
time you're talking, I'm just like, why is no one asking questions? I'm just saying, like, how does something? It's like a heist, but your eyes are wide open and you're present while the heist is happening. It's not even like happening while you're asleep. Like you're aware that it's happening, And so a couple of things. So I was listening to a podcast earlier, Sold a Story. And I didn't get too far, but far enough to hear that the woman who was released the podcast was doing some research and found some families that were willing to talk to her, whose children had been taught using F&P. Or Lucy Calkins or what have you. And like I said earlier during the introduction, around the 2020 time when everybody was home, listening to how their children were learning via Zoom and hearing that, whoa, this is not my child is reading, skipping every word, not able to put things together, what's going on. But I'm going back to that to say this, right? Whatever is dominant, right? That I think that becomes something that is intimidating to parents. So I want to get to solutions, like what we can offer in terms of that. But I think about like the fact that this was not just one town or one county, right? This is something that was widely accepted, right? These curriculum were widely used. And it's just like, yes, push back, but how, right? One of the parents in the interview on the podcast said when she did hear that and she knew something was wrong, she went to other parents and they were like looking at her like she was crazy because she's trying to push against what is dominant, what is widely accepted. She said she drafted an email to the principal and didn't send it because she didn't want to ruffle any feathers. And again, no one's to blame for that. That was her choice. But the point is, when you have somebody who's saying, or a system that's saying this is expertise and you should follow this and do this, right? And you are the quote unquote underdog, right? You don't have the manpower to be able to push back. Then what position does that leave you in as a parent, right? The parent did end up finally building a coalition. It took a lot of time. And I guess pioneering any change does take that level of work, persistence, and resilience. But it's like, damn, like, how do you really, impact change? And then my second question just is around SPED. Like, how many of our children have IEPs, right? How many Black boys, right? How many Black and brown children are sitting with IEPs? Because one of the parents in the podcast said, I was looking at my child and I was about to get her evaluated and I'm paraphrasing, but like, I was looking at her like, well, what's wrong with you? Or, like what's going on? Like, what's not connecting for you? And it wasn't that the things weren't connecting because of the child, but it was because of the way that reading was being taught, So what are your thoughts about what I just said? I know I said two things.
Well, I know we got to start closing too.
Yeah. So yes. And I want to head to kind of solutions, whatever we can offer.
I defer to the fellas. I'll put in my final thought.
Gotcha.
I'm just looking over some information here, just so we can. Before we move on to solutions, we're going to still talk about the problem. So at its peak, this curriculum was being utilized, with various levels of fidelity in about a quarter of U.S. elementary schools, right? And then you do the math from there, and in terms of the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project, extrapolate that out across school districts across the country. It's like hundreds of millions of dollars, right? That they were making over the years on both curriculum and training and professional development. So wanted to, make sure that we got that on the record. I think, the big issue here, and we can talk about the specifics of like cueing versus phonics and the different types of, methods and that children, how they learn how to read and process information, right? The big picture here, and you talked about this earlier, is these things should be left up to experts to determine, the curriculum, to decide on the curriculum, right? It shouldn't be a function of a company's ability to sell a product, right? So government money, government-run schools, including charter schools, right, should have, there should be a requirement, and it's not up to the schools to decide, but to select curriculum that has been vetted to be effective. That includes for math, that includes for science, social science. Now we're talking about literacy. And then the other big can of worms now is like, the big cash run now is social emotional curriculum, right? Is any of that,
which I criticized in my book, by the way, but continue.
Right. I mean, none of that is like scientifically like proven to improve children's social emotional well-being, right? But it's like the new thing. And so I think, I wanted to get that out there. But the big issue is that, especially in like elementary and early elementary, the first couple of years, the focus should be on teaching children how to read.
Absolutely.
And in the third grade, if you look at curriculum standards across the country, they start to move away from building skills to acquiring knowledge and content. So you go from learning to read to reading to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not ready at that second, third grade level, when that shift happens, that's where the achievement gaps start. That's where the school to prison pipeline starts. So we're not just picking fun at a particular reading curriculum, this and that. This has actually has impacted the lives of millions of children, right? And so once that gap starts, it's so hard for children to keep up in school, because schools no longer, even in elementary schools in like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, they stop focusing on those things. Like, we're moving on to content. We're moving on to comprehension. But if you can't read the words on the page and make meaning out of them, you are completely lost. And that's the real crux of the issue.
Indeed.
My closing thought.
Well, thank you very much. All right. Omar, what you got for closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think it boils down to the simple fact that when you are trying to understand what is best for kids, you kind of have to think like a human instead of a robot. And what I mean by that is that, like, David brought up, like, hey man, the switch from learning to read to reading to learn, right? It happens at like the 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, right? But then you start kicking into all these standards, right? And then the standards kick in, and then teachers are like, oh my God, I got to teach all these standards, and it's 6th grade standards, and we got to teach all these 6th grade standards and 7th grade standards, and those 7th grade and 6th grade standards have nothing to do with coming back and learning how to read. And I got to tell you that, like, one of the most pinnacle components of success for EPLA in our history has been that, starting with our 6th grade, because we start with 6th grade. We don't have an elementary school. We are now 6 through 12, but we started with middle school, is that we would get kids in 6th grade reading at the 1st grade level. And if I thought like a robot and was saying, we're going to use this curricular program without doing any examination into it, and we're going to just teach the 6th grade teats and hope that these kids are just going to figure out how to learn, our kids would be dead in the water. And this is why they were coming in at the 1st grade reading level in 6th grade. Because, as David said, that turn of reading to learn and learning to read just didn't happen for so many children. And they were left so far behind that they absolutely hated school. And of course they did. So instead of thinking like a robot, we had to think like humans and look at these kids and be like, all right, dude, to hell with what anyone tells me to do. If these kids don't have literacy skills and cannot read, they're never going to be successful. So I'm going to figure out a way within the day, not even before school or after school, not even this like tutoring shit that everyone thinks is like, oh, this is the panacea. I'm like, no, man, within the day, an accelerated learning component, which is now called like MTSS, right? Like RTI, like response to intervention. We had it during in the day to get kids caught up magnificently on their literacy skills. And this is why we had reading levels surge 3 to 5 grade levels in 1 year, because kids actually started learning how to read because we were teaching them how to read in middle school. And it was just blowing their minds, because like, oh my God, I thought it was dumb and it had nothing to do with that. Now that I can read, I'm accessing the information. And kids started reading. They went from like 4 books a year to 70 books a year. And all of a sudden, because that success begot success, their literacy jumped exponentially, because we had to do a diagnostic and actually think like fucking humans instead of just simply grinding the machine into this. And this is what I'm telling you. Doc is right on so many occasions, but listen, if you don't have a grandmother as wonderful as Toya, and you ain't got the mindset of a Dr. Charles Cole or Jubilee or David, you rely so heavily on the school system to do what's best for your kids. And I got to tell you, like, we need a greater level of accountability, but a greater level of, like, I don't know, man, like support for school systems to start finding the exceptional people that belong in the system that are going to do well by kids, start getting those fools who are, literally in it for all the wrong reasons out, but really bringing attention to asking the right questions and providing that level of support to leadership in these school districts to be like, listen, man, like we want all kids to succeed, but someone's got to be doing this analysis because it ain't happening. And that's just a plug for the South Star Classroom, by the way. Remember, we are not just a show, but a consulting agency.
There
And
you
we'd be
go,
happy
man.
to come in and help you all out.
There you go. For the record, I want to just say thank you. That is a lot of you all in here. Thank you to El Michelle and Bill Conrad and Mama Toya and everybody that is like responding. Thank you to our Roku family and everybody that's, if you're watching on YouTube, please like, please subscribe. I'm looking at the likes. I need you to like. I need to be a better producer and sell us better. So do that. I will say, this is what I would say. I think I love the conversation between the three educators that are on this show, because it is an insider baseball conversation. They are talking from experience. This is what they do in their profession. My comments right now are for the general community, people that don't know none of this, that don't know who Lucy Calkins is from a can of paint, or don't know about these different pedagogical models and don't have access to it. Listen, man, there are things that you can do, and you have to sit and read with your children. Read to them and make them read. You are still their parent or grandparent or whomever. Make their asses read. Ask them about their classes. Engage in conversations. You have to start building a love relationship with learning for your child, because at some point it will not be on you. I love Jubilee's sons. I love when she brings them up. I love seeing them. But at some point, Jubilee can't want the best education for them. They're going to have to find an appreciation for it. If something feels off, ask questions. I have free resources called the Agentic Parent Workbook that Toya has used, and it is not going into a level of detail about language curriculum. But what it is doing is it is setting you up to be able to goal set for your child, vision planning, and knowing when and how to ask questions and how to do those things. I don't have no beef with, in the sense, I'm not saying like, yo, all this shit is terrible, whatever the case is. What I'm telling you is that refrigerator is broken, and you keep putting your child's milk in it, and they keep getting sick, and you cannot at some point continue to wonder why. We are complicit at some point. Like, Lucy Calkins did not do this by herself. Hold her accountable. But there's a lot of other people that were in that. But the system is going to system. And what do I mean by that? They'll feed her to the wolves for you. They'll put her at the stake, and they'll keep doing what they need to do, and it'll be somebody else. That's all I'm saying. You are the only one at the end of the day truly responsible for your child. And I will end my thoughts on this as far as solutions. I am for teachers getting paid like doctors. You know why? Because what I get to add on that is, and your ass better have some malpractice insurance. The same way that they started holding doctors accountable for giving out fentanyl, the same way that they started to track who was getting these narcotics and who was getting this stuff, like, let's pay you more, but I want to actually be able to pay you in a way that we can hold you accountable. Because right now the system is faceless and nameless, and we might put Lucy Calkins' name as the face, and it might feed some of the wolves that need to eat, but it is not solving the war and war crimes of these kids less than 20% being able to read on grade level. And Jubilee, I know you're going to take us out and have your final thought, but kudos to you. It's a collective clap from us on you leading your first session and all that good stuff. So how about you take us home, madam?
First session this year.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Before she led from top to bottom. I thought I asked her. Maybe I'm off. If so, my bad. But it felt,
It's okay. My final thoughts are.
If I'm wrong, you told me. I'm just saying. I asked you.
I told you this year. I don't know if maybe I was.
Okay.
I don't know. But it is the first for. See, now I'm distracted. Okay, but my final thoughts are this. I love that thing. These people profited off of mass ignorance and desperation. That's essentially what existed, right? And I think in order for us to address that, we need to fix this broken cycle. And I think it starts with what's happening in teacher preparation programs and us really developing experts in our field. I think we are the only field that allows other people to come in and be like, This is blue. We see that the color is red. They come in and say it's blue. We're like, oh, it's blue. And I think this is how this heist happened. And I'm not going to play like pin the tail on a donkey, but I do think this issue is indicative of the fact that we have handed over our power to other people who are looking to make a profit. And I believe that probably Fonte Pinel and Lucy Calkins, these people probably started with good intention and maybe thought that they were doing a good thing and they really wanted to help people read. I don't know that they had malintent, but the problem is that after all the time of seeing data and research and all of this stuff, we didn't change our tune. Like, why didn't we? In any other field, right? If a business is not making money, you close the business down 5 years, right? Like we washed our hands of it. Like, why in education do we give people processes, philosophies, pedagogy, all these different things, such a long rope to destroy the lives of children? Like, to me, that's unacceptable. Why aren't we more curious? Why don't we ask more questions? And why don't we have the courage to draw the line and say, no more, this is not working. And we need to do away with this and find something that does, based on research, So that's it. You have been tuned in to the South Star Classroom. I am Jubilee. That's Charles. That's David. And that's Omar Yanar. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe. And we'll see you next time. Same place, same time.
Peace.
Today's episode of BS3 Network is brought to you by McDonald's. McDonald's is going to McDonald's and creating a universe for longtime fans of both McDonald's and anime. I love sauce on my McNuggets and can't wait to try the savory chili McDonald's sauce. It's savory, chili, and bold. For decades, across various episodes and genres, McDonald's has shown up in the anime world and most commonly called McDonald's. McDonald's will be bringing the McDonald's world to life with episodic shorts and manga comics. For a limited time, anime fans will have the opportunity to experience their favorite fictional restaurant. You have until March 25th to try the new savory chili McDonald's sauce with your 10-piece chicken nuggets.